to Hot Issues. This week we are taking a look at the security situation in the world after the 9/11 attack. You do know that this is virtually the anniversary of 9/11. How is the world faring after 9/11? And then we'll take a look at the Ghanaian security situation, look at how the allegation against some judges would impact on national security, and also the fear that IS is recruiting in Ghana. Is that true? And is that really making any impact on our lives? Welcome to Hot Issues. We are really privileged to have with us in the studio somebody who knows his stuff, who actually teaches at the Kofi Annan Peace Training Center in Accra, and who is an expert on security, Dr. Kwesi Aning. Doc, welcome to the studio.
Well, it's a great pleasure.
Yeah. How is the world coping with 9/11? Has the world managed to cope with 9/11? What are the implications of 9/11 today?
Well, I think we've managed to cope. But that coping has had dramatic unintended impact on our lives. The very DNA of how societies function and how communities hang together and how states relate to each other are all driven by the dramatic and tragic events of 9/11. But not only that, 9/11 has also resulted in an unnecessary politicization and securitization of even economic relations. Kwesi, you do remember that when you and I were considerably younger, when one spoke about official development aid, it was about poverty reduction, it was about health interventions, job creation, basic education, public hygiene. Right now, what we see is that there is a certain dramatic shift in the actual sums that are devoted to these critical developmental issues. And there's a shift to the softer side of security in terms of security training for police officers, immigration, for the provision of tear gas. So some of the more traditional funders of development, Canada, Australia, Denmark, Japan, the Netherlands, actually almost all the OECD countries have shifted and securitized and politicized aid. But that is on the grander scale. For you and I, traveling has become quite a discomfort. You know, the removal of belts, shoes, laptops. That we see that security at airports, have increased, and uncomfortably so. Sometimes I think it's useful, but I think more often than not, there's a certain sadistic, trends about how some of these officers work. But I think the most terrifying impact of 9/11, as we celebrate this, or we remember those who lost their lives, is the emergence of the surveillance state. That it has almost become accepted and legal for the state, under the broader guise of preventing terrorism, to intrude into our lives. And the intrusion comes across board, looking into our emails, into our text messages, listening to our conversations, and basically intruding into almost everything that we do. Whilst there's a certain realization that preventing a 9/11 or the recurrence of a 9/11 type incident is key, and particularly for weak, poor states like most sub-Saharan African states, it is crucial that we don't allow it to happen. I mean, we've seen it in Kenya, Somalia, Nigeria, Mali, La Côte d'Ivoire. I think we need to find a very fine balance between the respect for human rights and the rule of law, whilst at the same time protecting the citizens of countries. I think most states, or almost all states, have not been able to find that fine balancing act.
Now, we've gone to war. I mean, the world virtually has gone to war in Iraq. Yeah. The world is still at war in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden allegedly has been killed, and so on. Is the world any safer?
No, far from it. I think, and this will tie in to your introductory remarks about what is happening in Ghana right now, both the recruitment by IS and Boko Haram, and the rather unfortunate incident the last couple of days with the judges. But the world has not become safer because the ability of the state to deliver social welfare goods, particularly in the developing world, but also to have an inclusivist politics that moves away from rapacious elite acquisition of what can be characterized as our public goods, that makes people feel that first, that their rights are being trampled upon, that what ought to be the social goods, that their fair share is not coming to them. So that leads to some of these violent extremist organizations adopting a rhetoric that says, look, you've got a right to have access to health, to land, to housing, to jobs, to education. Look at what is happening. So although you and I in this room are abhorred by the excessive violence used by, these violent and extremist groups, I think it's necessary for us also to say, how can we respond to that recruiting discourse that they put forward by providing social welfare goods? You would notice that for quite a number of these groups, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, Ansaru, Mujahid, Al-Shabaab, even IS, there is a rhetoric that seeks to provide an alternative to the daily challenges that people are facing in their lives. And there's a certain eschatological rhetoric around it. You come to us, life is hard, but at least you'll be contributing to the creation of a new life. Now, you and I know that creation will not work. But when people feel so cut off and so desperate, and they feel there's no outlet, it is easy, they become easy fodder to be recruited. And that makes the world considerably more unsafe. The violence is irrational. Or let me put it this way, from what my friend Keane classifies it, that there's a certain rational kind of madness. That the choice of targets are not as irrational as we think. That the deliberate willingness by people to say, if I strike a blow and Kwesi lose their lives and I lose my life, at least I have struck a blow at two important Ghanaians, and that is satisfactory for me. So I think we need to do the counterfactual, asking the tough questions that you are asking me now. Is the world safe? And if the answer is no, 15 years after 9/11, what can we do to make life safe? How can we give people a certain hope that our communities, our institutions, and the edifice of the state can actually provide some solace, some hope, and some inclusiveness in the way that things are done? Unfortunately, with what has happened the last couple of days in Ghana, I think that role of the state as a lead in bringing hope to people, I think has been undermined.
What about Al-Qaeda itself? Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility for the attack on the World Trade Center. Is Al-Qaeda active? Has it been sufficiently decimated?
I think Al-Qaeda Incorporated has not been sufficiently decimated. And I think what is dangerous about violent extremist organizations is not so much those who formed it and where it was formed. Mm-hmm. It is the business mentality and ideas underlining it. That is the franchising. Now, when it is franchised and you cut off the head has already grown 10 other heads. So whilst Al-Qaeda core is facing tough challenges. But Al-Zawahiri is still around. Osama bin Laden's son has taken over the mantle. And there are people who willingly still support Al-Qaeda. IS is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. Boko Haram has declared allegiance to Al-Qaeda. So Boko Haram has become the West African franchise of IS. You know, Al-Qaeda is big in Algeria, in Mali, in Mauritania, in parts of Niger. So it's far from dead. And I think as the world goes through tough economic challenges, as governments are unable to meet the expectations, and I think sometimes the elite political class is part of it. The rhetoric in their drive to get access to political power makes them give promises that they know they cannot deliver. And when they get power, they begin to retract. And there's also this unreasonable set of promises. We will do this. We will deal with this issue. And we've seen it in Nigeria. We've seen it in Kenya. We've seen it in Somalia. We've seen it in Mali, where there are fairly unreasonable promises about dealing with some of these issues. Fighting insurgencies are fairly tough. But there's a certain reluctance, Kwesi, by those who have power. They want to be history teachers, but they don't want to be history students. And we've seen a repeat of that in Libya. The African Union had a very clear focus and idea as to how Libya should be responded to. But the powers that be thought, no. I mean, we've dealt with this guy. He's handed in his nuclear weapons. We've destroyed his nuclear program. We can, if we eliminate him, we can get better access to the oil. Not understanding the complex ethnic tapestry of the Libyan state. And I think we are now beginning to see the way IS has taken over about a third of the state and is exporting a much more radicalized version of the violence that we are seeing elsewhere.
You see IS as a spin-off from Al-Qaeda. Are there any differences between IS and Al-Qaeda in terms of their, operational, presence, and even in terms of their ideological posturing?
Well, there are very slight differences, but IS sees the use of targeted violence as a business. Al-Qaeda had a more, let me say, an ideological approach to the violence. For IS, it's business, but it's business that is predicated on fear and the rampant destruction of, cultural artifacts. And that type of behavior and thinking was what we also saw in Mali, in which Al-Qaeda in Mali, for some strange reason, decided to destroy, the libraries of Timbuktu and Gao. Now, the question...
doesn't that spring from Wahhabism? The Sunni attitude to artifacts and so on. Is there not a connection?
No, there's a connection there. And a most unfortunate connection. Because for those who follow blindly, and I think it would be quite nice were we to have an Hakim, an Al-Qaeda and Islamic Maghreb fellow, and a Mujahid fellow who actually destroyed some of these artifacts and killed women for not dressing properly, and said, look, 5 years down the line, what do you think about it? I think we see part of the challenge and the difficulty in giving you a direct answer is that the title War on Terror creates an impression that does not allow us to grasp those that we need to talk to understand why they behave the way they do. And probably this might be tangential to the conversation, but the war on terror, or the definition of this response to the violence, is that because we've defined it as war, immediately we go in there to respond. We don't respond using the prosecutors, we don't respond using the forensic scientists, we don't respond using law enforcement. We use the military. And that is why in most cases, it's almost impossible to jail a terrorist, because immediately the violence occurs. It's the military that goes in first. And of course, I can understand the emotive aspect that says, look, somebody has committed this type of atrocity, let's go in and wipe them out. Mm-hmm. But when we do that, it is almost difficult or impossible for us to get access to the information, to the forensics, and to be able to bring them to book. And therefore, in Kenya, it was the same thing. We've seen it in Mali, we've seen it in the UK, we've seen it in the US, and in most countries. And I think we need to change that approach to responding to these violent extremist groups. Otherwise, we will shoot them, yes. But whilst when we lose our lives, those of us on the supposedly good side, it's difficult to get people to step into our shoes. For them, because this is a business and it creates a new kind of identity. One person is shot in the battle, 10 people step into their shoes. And part of the failure or supposed success against Al-Qaeda is the drone stuff. Okay, but the collateral damage in terms of innocent lives killed is leading to a fairly easy recruitment of people in Afghanistan still in Pakistan. So there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done in terms of the approach in responding to the challenges that we see.
So we're going to go for a short break. And when we come back, I'd like us to look at Ghana and possibly West Africa. Is it true, as our own security services confirm, that ISIS may have a toe in our country? And what does that mean for all of us? Sure. So short break. Hello and welcome back to Hot Issues, and we're in conversation with Dr. Kwesi Aning of the Kofi Annan Peacekeeping Training Center in Accra. And we're generally discussing the security situation in the world after 9/11. Now, sir, we are told that IS may have not quite a foot, but more like a toe in Ghana. What is the situation with regards to IS in Ghana? What do we know?
Well, I think I'm more interested in what we don't know. I think it would be terribly naive on our part to think that we could, protect ourselves from what is happening in Mali and in Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. Now, if you do a strategic calculus of how terrorists think, we are a major peacekeeping or a troop contributing country and a police contributing country. Basically meaning that by virtue of our international posturing, we are preventing these groups from attaining what they want to attain. And therefore we become a legitimate target in their calculus. Now, I think a toehold is probably more dangerous than a foothold. And why do I say so? A toehold makes it difficult to identify, to understand, and then to target. But I don't want people to get us wrong. This country, over the past 10 years, probably has had some of the most foiled attempts at terrorism as compared to other countries. And I think here we must be quite thankful to those in uniform and those in mufti who work whilst we sleep. In the last 3 years or so, there have been a few reportages in the newspapers about explosives found at under electricity pylons or communication pylons. And the question is why? Who are these groups who want to do this? Where do they get these explosives from? And I think, Kwesi, it's not so much about IS per se as the types of regulations and laws we have governing the materials that you can use to create explosions. That's number one. Number two, there's a tendency to believe that the people are going and therefore it's not a big deal. My point is that we need to look at the counterfactual. People don't go for the sake of going. People go because they want to come back. That's number two. Number three, we haven't been too smart in saying all these adverts in the newspapers, recruiting people to go to all these countries in the East. What are they going to do? What are these companies? Who are those who fund for them? What are their networks? And why do they want to recruit people here? So I think they are very tough questions that we haven't asked or we've swept under the carpet for a very long time. Now, precisely because of the dangers posed to all of us by IS, and people talk about those who have gone to northern Niger. They haven't gone anywhere. They've gone around the confluence of Niger, southern part of Niger, the Diffa County, the northeastern part, and the northwestern part of Cameroon, that triangle. That is where they've not gone to Iraq. Neither have they gone to Syria. There are more than enough training grounds within those triangles. And therefore, we need to ask ourselves, how do we as a community and as a nation come together to identify and to report and to respond? And I think we are still working with old security concepts and ideas that says, if you are not a formally trained securocrat, you shouldn't touch security issues. But I think precisely because of the strategies that are used in recruiting, in enticing people, and ensuring that ordinary people, those who were old friends, are now seen as enemies, that I think the securocrats must now come to communities and say, and to explain that we are in this together. Please help us. You see, because the way that this IS story was handled and the responses, I mean, I wasn't in this country then, but reading it online and listening to radio, the impression was that, oh, well, don't worry, we knew about this, so why didn't you tell us? Because you can't deal with this alone. And I think immediately they had the inkling a year ago or 18 months ago that something was brewing. They ought to have come out and to say, guys, we are in trouble. We are in a bad neighborhood, and we've got to be aware that these are the things that we've got to, all of us should look out for. And this is the hotline. You can trust us. You've got to give us the information. If we continue to think that they won't come here, I think it's extremely naive and it's extremely dangerous. Why? Because you can download IS material on your phone, you can download Boko Haram materials on your phone, you can listen to them on the radio. Their ability to use cyberspace is considerably better than most states' ability to use the cyberspace. And I think with young people's knowledge, I think it's important that we change the strategies that we are using. First, to inform people, to get their buy-in and their support, and to encourage people to come in with information. It's possible that we may have to sift a lot of rubbish, chaff. But even if every 15,000 false calls for information, there are one or two that can lead to some substantive, outcome. I would say that is a useful thing.
Should we get directly involved in the fight against a group like Boko Haram? Given the link between Boko Haram and ISIS, and also given the spread of Boko Haram in West Africa, should Ghana send troops to confront Boko Haram?
Well, I think we are best with intelligence and with analysis. I don't think we should have troops on the ground. I think we can best support our Nigerian brothers and Cameroon, Niger, and Chad by helping them with the intelligence, with the analysis, the triangulation, and gathering the data that we want. Why don't I want troops on the ground? The multinational joint task force is riddled with suspicion. Mm-hmm. Cameroon doesn't want Nigerian troops to do hot pursuit onto its territory. Niger neither wants that. Chad, on several occasions, has come onto Nigerian territory, and basically they didn't get the support. So that the core members of the multinational joint task force don't have unity of purpose in terms of how to respond. And that is why the rather optimistic rhetoric arising from defeating Boko Haram is still a mirage of some sort. Mm-hmm. So I think where we are strong as a country, that intelligence is good, the analytical capabilities are very good, our ability to use ICT is fairly decent, and I think that is the kind of targeted support that I think we can provide.
Do you think that West Africa is making much progress in the fight against Boko Haram?
West Africa is not making good progress in the fight against violent extremist groups. I think it's not just Boko Haram. Probably there are about 15, 16 different violent groups in West Africa. I think the focus on Boko Haram, and I don't think there's one Boko Haram, pushes us from having a clear focus on what we want to do. For the past 4 or 5 years, our understanding of terrorism and terrorism-related responses have come from the securocratic side. My argument is that we need to bring in many more people, psychologists, political scientists, international relationists, sociologists, anthropologists, to bring different perspectives to build that picture. I think there's also a tendency for exceedingly high-tech stuff. I don't think it works. I think we need a hands-on, grassroots response. Community engagement, for me, is defining, because these guys are located within communities. And I'll share something with you. In 2009 and 10, the UN sent me to Mauritania, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger to say, look, Kwesi, can you try and find out, live in these communities, travel around and find out what is happening? So I spent some time, spoke to people, both government, ordinary people, used Kwame Nkrumah's name to get access all over the place, and went to Kidal. And in Kidal, the governor took me out and pointed, and we counted 100 Lexus 4x4s. And he said, that is Al-Qaeda going.
Lexus?
4x4s. Already by 2009, Al-Qaeda was the state in northern Mali. In parts of Niger, slim, fair-colored, tall people are passing through Niger and going up north. A 56-page report was rejected by most West African states that terrorism is un-West African. We can't kill ourselves, that we wouldn't shed blood deliberately. My argument is very simple. Until we have a clear focus and a willingness to accept and to debate the analysis that our own people put on the table, then I think terrorism is going to be with us for a very long time.
Welcome back to hot issues, and we are discussing the security situation in the world after 9/11, the recruitment of ISIS, sympathizers in Ghana, or alleged recruitment. And now we want to take a look at the revelations of corruption in the Ghanaian judiciary and whether or not they do have some security implications. Dr. Kwesi Aning, do they have some security implications?
They do. And unfortunately, worryingly so. Our governments are made up of three components, of which the judiciary is key. And the judiciary is key to the effective functioning of states, and more importantly, the mediation, amelioration, and resolution of disputes. And that is why consistently people will retort, you can go to court. Because there is a belief that although the law is an ass, it can deliver good ass judgments. But there's also been a consistent perception that there is corruption in the judiciary. I'll cite two cases where individuals who have dared to voice their concerns have almost been hounded out of town or the institutions. One was the former executive secretary to the president, Dr. Raymond Atukuba, who gave some indication of sorts about his experiences. And I think there was another fellow. There was Hula Baloo. And they wouldn't be allowed to appear in court, all sorts of things. That was just before he became the executive secretary to the president. A couple of years ago, I appeared before the West African Commission on Drugs and cited examples from West Africa in which there have been fairly dubious judgments relating to narcotics cases. There was an uproar because there were one or two judges in the room until President Obasanjo and the former president of Cape Verde said, no. We know from our own experiences that these things do happen. So there's a certain elite consensus by judges that they shouldn't be touched. Now, what does Anas Arimiyao Anas's video tell us? I think we need to celebrate world-class journalism, because what Anas has done is world-class journalism, almost incomparable. So I doff my hat to Anas and his team. The revelations have very disturbing consequences. If we accept that the law should resolve disputes and not always based on what you and I understand of the law or the case, but at least if the institution has a reputation for fairness and objectivity and sometimes some neutrality, then what has happened means several things. One, for all those who feel that they've brought cases before the implicated judges, those who lost will now feel they've been treated unfairly. Now it is contingent upon those who have seen the video and Her Lordship, the Chief Justice and the President, I think, to quickly come out with a set of statements about the way forward. And what do I mean? If 34 judges, or now I think 22 have been suspended, 12 have to respond to some queries. If 22 judges...
And there are more than 100 judicial service personnel who are also implicated.
Now, if the film took 2 years, and on average, these individuals have been in the service for 10 years, my suggestion is that every single case that has passed through the hands of these individuals must be recalled. The state must pay for the cases to be re-examined, and for those who feel that they need redress, for compensations to be paid quickly. Why? If we know the number of cases that these people have handled over time, and those who lost the cases that appeared before these individuals. If those who lost were breadwinners, some of them may have died. Some of them may have gotten incurably sick because of these judgments. The revelation the last 3 days opens old wounds and old bitter memories. And I think it is critical and important that the state steps in and to say, Kwesi and Kwesi, we may have failed you. We are not saying we have failed you. We may have failed you. But we are going to put a plaster on the sore first. We need psychologists to talk to these people, to calm their families down, and for us to reassure them that we'll look at the cases once more by people that we think are competent, honest, and fair. If we don't, the tensions and the pressures and the hurt will boil over. One of the things we are not good at doing is looking and examining looking at the emotional aspects of some of these difficulties. When you've lost a case, and we know that cases can drag on forever. I think there was some guy who was promising to drag the case for 10 years, one of these judges. Now, if it drags on for 10 years, the family wealth is dissipated. And if we now know that a case that dragged on for 5 years was deliberately dragged on, and the family's wealth dissipated, of course, you can imagine the amount of bitterness, the hurt, the anger, and the desire to strike a blow at representatives of the state, or any representative of the state. And earlier on, we spoke about the discourses by these violent groups that almost legitimizes when you strike at the state. So, yes,
So obviously you're advocating some kind of review of cases.
Yes.
Who bears the cost of these reviews?
The state.
Should they be the normal appeal, where the aggrieved person bears the cost? What should be the arrangement?
Well, particularly in this particular case, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm looking at it purely from the securocratic side. That because this video, and I'm looking forward to watching it, paints a damning picture of goats and yams. And I don't know how many slices of yam I can eat, but of course we know that goat also has too much cholesterol, so I'm quite surprised people want to get goats and yams. But I think because of the potential fallout, the state must bear, because these guys were working on behalf of the state. And if they've done what they've done, people accepted the judgment in good faith because these were representatives of the state. I think there's something called Article 71. Office holders. So it is our collective tax money that paid their water bill, the electricity, the fuel in the car, the police guard, the driver, the tax on the land on which their estate or official house resided upon. So it is the responsibility of the state to provide solace and to pay for the cost of the review. That will calm tempers. That will assuage the hurt. We cannot fully pay for the hurt, because see, don't forget, when you lose a case that now we can prove is false, the sense of shame, the snide remarks from your communities. Even if we came back now to say, oh, Kwesi and Kwesi, look, your cases were judged wrongly. It's in people's minds that, and so there's a responsibility by the state to step in quickly and to say, we will redress the hurts of people. We will redress where our representatives have fallen foul. I'm not talking about what we should do to the individuals involved.
No.
I'm talking about the victims, and I'm using the word victims. Yeah, the consequences. Yeah.
Now, there's a current controversy over whether or not these tapes should be aired publicly. What is your view?
Anas hasn't committed any crime in filming anything?
No.
So what is the problem with not airing the tapes?
Well, some have argued that if the tapes are aired, it will do irreparable damage
to
the state.
Yes. But when school children get pregnant and we think that it's school teachers who have done the deed, we don't prevent the story from coming out. Actually, we actually rejoice when SS or JSS girls go and do the exams and they are carrying a hot cake and we say it's a school teacher. We rejoice in saying that. No one is above the law, not even the president. Precisely the argument that people are making, that airing the tapes will threaten the state, within that argument is the answer to this fear. If we don't air the tapes, what we want to tell those who are world class in what they do, that please announce next time, do a mediocre tape. Doesn't matter. Number two, if Anas had made a mistake, these guys would have chewed him alive and saddled him with debts that he would never pay 4 generations down the line. So this argument is untenable. That's number one. People have seen the tapes. Some people have collapsed. Why did they collapse? Because they had a conversation like you and I. I don't think you and I are going to collapse when we leave here. Why are people running away to hand over their cars and their official property? People don't resign in this country. So if others are running to resign, then there must be some really interesting stuff on those tapes. And Nas has a right to make those tapes. He did not put a gun to anybody's head to speak. I doubt if he bribed any judge to implicate himself or herself on those tapes. So the tapes must be shown. And I think after it has premiered a couple of times, it must be shown on Prime TV, free for all of us to watch. Because we need a process in which people can say crime does not pay. Right now in this country, crime pays, political violence pays, and corruption pays. I think it's important when the fish rots, they start rotting from the head. Fortunately for us, we've got a young man who is bold and daring and has taught us that for the first time we can identify how the rot takes place and that we can also stop that rot or the rotting process. Anas's tape must be aired, or Anas must take his tape. I'm sure some country will be very willing to air it, buy it and put it on YouTube. Is that what we want? No. I'm sure he can take it to YouTube. Or a few people have seen it, and I'm sure some people in the judiciary have seen it. Right now, if it appears on YouTube, we can't track who put it there. Because some of the advantages, and certainly the disadvantages of the cyberspace, is the issue of attribution. Mm-hmm. So you see, let's not play the ostrich that we are world-class people are playing in this country. A journalist has done great work. This is a service to this country. And I hope that when the president gives national awards, Anas must be given the highest award in the civil category. Because you see, when Anas did his tape about the SOS village, these judges didn't say he shouldn't show it because it would disgrace Ghana by the way that we steal rice and sugar and oil from children who didn't have parents. When Professor Mel got incensed and went to the Tamahabo, we didn't tell Anas you can't show it because he just showed that all of us, when we bring one television or fridge, we're able to smuggle it through that. No. Judges as upholders of the law must be subjected to the same law. I, as a school teacher, I'm sure if I mark somebody down and the person is dissatisfied, there's a grievance procedure. You can tell me, Kwesi, but why did you give me a B plus when I think I deserved an A? So, you write a formal letter, you attach your paper, we give it to an independent blind reviewer to read the paper. If you are lucky, you get your A. If you are not lucky, you get a C minus. Okay? So, I think Anas has done tapes in which there's been a lot of hula baloo, but very little impact. This one, because you remember when we were at the height of the revolution, there was this guy, Jack, at a circle. He says, when a poor man hits a rich man's stomach, giving a big blow in the stomach, it pains the rich man because the poor man who was sitting. This one is an ordinary journalist who is sitting at the very top. The tape must be shown under no circumstance. I don't think we should go around pussyfooting. If this had been done in the US, would have said, wow, this American journalist is good. And the Americans actually started and watched it. This country is a great place to live. Let's make ourselves great. Let's respect ourselves. Let's put that video out there for the public to see.
We are told that the Attorney General has granted some immunities to Anas Arimoyao Anas.
Yeah.
What are your views?
Well, immunities for what? You see, a couple of years ago, I wrote an article about the levels of corruption in West Africa and the way that West African states were using mercenaries to shoot their own people and to steal their resources. When the article was published in Global Security, there was a caveat. This article does not represent the views of the editorial board. And I wrote to the editorial board that, you see, you are cowards. Everyone knows that when an article appears in a journal, it doesn't represent the views of the editorial board. So why do you put that caveat there? So they wrote and apologized. Is there something bad in the tape? Or the Attorney General knows that somebody wants to do harm? Very well. So next time I write an article about transparency in Ghana, will I be given immunity? But I think it raises some questions. Immunity from what?
From prosecution.
By who?
Attorney General.
This is an interesting perspective. That Attorney General could possibly have prosecuted Anas for showing that some judge has taken a goat and a yam. Where's the criminality in that? Is there a law in this country that when you film somebody secretly without the person's consent, that is a crime? So why haven't we criminalized and punished Anas all these years? But we have lapped up whatever he has told us. Earlier on, you and I discussed the way that exclusivist, elitist approaches to governance also leads to frustrations and, by inference, a certain willingness to hit at the state. No, if there is a law that says you can't do that, that is fine. But even then, what is the rational choices that we have? Do we want to keep this tape secret as against bringing it out and preventing people from exploding against a major state institution? Or we want this tape to come out and to say, look, well, probably there's some unclear regulation that if you are filming me, I must know. But, well, we didn't follow it. So, we cannot show it, and we will let these bad things continue. I think on balance, it's good that this tape has been done, and NAS must come out with it. And then we can say, how do we reverse the negative developments in this issue? I mean, the judiciary is way too important. And I can imagine how dignified members of the bar are feeling. I mean, I can imagine the hurt. Because, you see, if somebody were to say all academics are plagiarists, I'm sure we would be very incensed. But if somebody had a tape that can document specifically who has been plagiarizing or which group has been plagiarizing, I, as an academic, will say, bring it on, show the tape. Because, you see, we need to protect those who are good in the service. And we need also to say kudos to them. Because I'm sure on that tape,
I'm told that there are a few judges who said no.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah.
And we need to see their faces, and as a state say, kudos to them also. You see, and the interest of the good ones, even if there were only 2 among the X number of hundreds of judges, even if there were only 2 who said no, as a state we need to say kudos. You too should rebuild the service. Those who are on that tape, who said no, should be patted on the back. And then we need to ask them, knowing the attractiveness of your position and people's willingness to corrupt you, what gave you the moral strength to say no? I'm hoping to God none of the people who are there went to fancy school. Well, then have to be an emergency meeting. No, but certainly the video must be shown.
Should the state be protecting a nurse? Should the state offer protection to a nurse?
It would be useful. A nurse is an important state asset. If you remember, a nurse also did a video on, I think, rice importance of smuggle around Elubo. Nothing came out of it. But that, if we had followed through, it would have earned us hundreds of millions of dollars or saved the state. The port video, if we had followed through, would have saved us hundreds of millions of dollars.
That was actually commissioned by Professor Mills.
Yes. Now, if there's an individual who brings in $1 million of clean post-tax profit to his company, that person will be given massive bonuses every year. If a nurse is saving us all this money, or at least exposing what the state is losing, I think it's in our collective interest as a state to stay. We will protect you and carry on. And let not people misunderstand me. The interest of a state is to ensure that those who can support it in providing social welfare goods, in strengthening the state, are always protected. We admire Singapore so much. Lee Kuan Yew was not the nicest guy in town, and he didn't always use the most orthodox methods. But certainly those who bought into his ideas, they and their families were protected to be able to deliver as optimally as possible. I mean, the Chinese have a special network protected by the state that does nothing but to hack into systems. Okay, and us is not doing any of those things. He's just saying, I'm a proud Ghanaian, and proudly so, but I'm unhappy with the way things are going. So I'll use my God-given talents. And here, let me say kudos also to our friend Kweku Baku for creating that space within which innovative ideas and approaches to journalism, can be encouraged. So I think it's in our collective interest really to ensure that Anas is protected to carry on doing his work.
Also, thank you very much for coming to the studio.
Well, it's always a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Well, viewers, we've been talking to Dr. Kwesi Aning.